The 1930s were a time of deep anxiety for France, still haunted by the devastation of World War I. The loss of a generation in the trenches was a constant reminder of the cost of peace. When Hitler and the Nazis rose to power in 1933, promising to overturn the Treaty of Versailles and rebuild Germany's military, France felt directly threatened. Hitler's bold moves, rearming Germany, remilitarizing the Rhineland, were clear violations of the post-war order. France and Britain protested, but their fear of another war and the economic woes of the Great Depression led to inaction. This emboldened Hitler, who saw the Western democracies as unwilling to stop him. The annexation of Austria and the Munich Agreement, which handed the Sudetenland to Germany, were desperate attempts to avoid conflict but only encouraged further aggression. For many in France, Munich was a national humiliation, a sign their leaders were failing to confront a growing danger. The illusion of peace shattered in 1939 when Hitler invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia, revealing his ambitions for conquest. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Germany and the Soviet Union stunned the world, clearing the way for Hitler to invade Poland without fear of a two-front war. When German tanks rolled into Poland on September 1, 1939, France and Britain knew appeasement had failed. They had to honor their alliance with Poland. The time for talk was over. On September 3rd, France declared war on Germany. The world was once again plunged into conflict. France faced the terrifying prospect of another war with Germany, but this time, the stakes were even higher. The choices made in the coming months would determine the fate of Europe. The countdown to catastrophe had begun. France's declaration of war was driven by honor, alliances, and the realization that Hitler could not be stopped by words. The alliance with Poland was central to French security. Abandoning it would destroy France's credibility. National pride and the desire to defend democracy were at stake. The French military, considered the strongest in Europe, was confident in its tanks, infantry, and defensive preparations. But their thinking was shaped by memories of World War I. They expected a slow, grinding conflict. The strategy contained Germany, blockade its economy, and wait for the right moment to strike. The period of waiting, known as the Phony War, reinforced the belief that France's defensive approach was working. However, French commanders misunderstood the new German Blitzkrieg tactics. Fast, coordinated attacks using tanks and aircraft. French tanks were dispersed, not concentrated, and their command structure was slow. France chose to fight, but prepared for the wrong kind of war. This miscalculation would prove disastrous. France's defensive strategy centered on the Maginot Line, a vast system of bunkers and fortresses along the German border. It was a marvel of engineering, designed to prevent another German invasion and buy time for French mobilization. The Maginot Line fostered a false sense of security and a defensive mindset. Crucially, it did not extend through the Ardennes forest, which French planners considered impassable for tanks. As a result, the Ardennes was lightly defended. The best French and British forces were positioned to rush into Belgium, expecting a repeat of Germany's World War I strategy. But the Germans planned differently. Their main attack would come through the Ardennes, bypassing the Maginot Line entirely. The fortress that was supposed to guarantee French security became irrelevant. France's faith in static defenses blinded it to the real threat. The stage was set for disaster. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched its offensive in the west. As expected, German troops invaded Belgium and the Netherlands, drawing the best Allied forces north. But the real attack came through the Ardennes, where German panzer divisions broke through weak French defenses. French commanders dismissed reports of German tanks in the Ardennes as panic. By May 13th, German forces had crossed the Meuse River at Sedan, breaking the French line. Instead of consolidating, the panzers raced west toward the English Channel, the Sickle Cut. The speed and surprise of the German advance paralyzed Allied command. Communications broke down, and the French Air Force was powerless against the Luftwaffe. Within 10 days, German forces reached the coast, trapping the best French and British armies at Dunkirk. The Battle of France was effectively lost in less than 2 weeks. The German gamble had paid off spectacularly. France was now fighting for survival. With Allied armies trapped, France faced collapse. The Dunkirk evacuation saved many British and French soldiers, but left France exposed. The Germans launched a second offensive, overwhelming depleted French forces. The government fled Paris, and on June 14th, German troops entered the city unopposed. The fall of Paris was a national trauma, a symbol of defeat. In Bordeaux, the government was divided. Some wanted to fight on from the colonies, others argued for an armistice. Marshal Pétain, the new head of government, believed surrender was the only way to save what remained of France. On June 16, Pétain asked Germany for armistice terms. The battle for France was over. The nation was left to grapple with defeat, occupation, and the question of its future. The choices made in these desperate days would haunt France for years to come. The agony of defeat was complete. On June 22, 1940, France signed an armistice with Germany in the same railway carriage where Germany had surrendered in 1918. Hitler's revenge was complete. The terms were harsh. Germany occupied most of France, including Paris and the Atlantic coast. The French army was disarmed, and France was forced to pay for the occupation. The unoccupied South became Vichy France, led by Marshal Pétain. The Vichy regime collaborated with the Nazis, passing anti-Semitic laws and aiding in the deportation of Jews. The French economy and workers were exploited for the German war effort. The nation was split. Some saw Pétain as a savior, others as a traitor. Collaboration and resistance divided families and communities. The wounds of occupation and betrayal would last for generations. France's identity and honor were at stake. While Pétain surrendered, Charles de Gaulle refused to accept defeat. Escaping to London, he called on the French to continue the fight in his famous June 18th broadcast. De Gaulle's appeal launched the Free French movement, though at first only a handful joined him. The Free French fought alongside the Allies in North Africa, the Middle East and Italy, keeping the hope of a free France alive. Inside occupied France, the resistance grew, ordinary people risking everything to sabotage the Germans and aid the Allies. The resistance published underground newspapers, gathered intelligence, and carried out daring acts of sabotage. Their courage inspired the nation and undermined the occupiers. Though the French state had surrendered, the French people had not. When the Allies landed in Normandy in 1944, the resistance played a vital role. Free French forces helped liberate Paris, restoring the French flag to the capital. The spirit of defiance, kindled by de Gaulle's lonely broadcast, ensured France would emerge from the war as a victor. The fight for France's soul continued long after the guns fell silent. The legacy of resistance and collaboration would shape the nation for generations.